In the early 1600s, Europe witnessed a financial collapse that feels oddly modern, a meltdown driven by greed, cunning, and the quiet theft of value. Historians call it the Kipper and Wipper crisis, roughly clipping and weighing time. Strange name, but an explosive story. This little-known catastrophe from the 1620s in central Germany ranks among the first major currency breakdowns in recorded history, and if you look closely, it mirrors how money loses value today. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? If you love digging into how history reveals the hidden mechanics of modern finance, hit subscribe and like. These forgotten tales deserve an audience. Now, set the stage. Europe, early 17th century. The 30 Years' War has erupted. One of the bloodiest, most ruinous conflicts the continent had ever seen. Armies on the move, cities burning, rulers scrambling to fund campaigns. War is expensive. Gunpowder, mercenaries, siege equipment, horses. The whole bloody apparatus needs money. When the silver and gold stores ran dry, governments got creative, and corruption followed. The Holy Roman Empire wasn't a single state, it was a patchwork. Dozens of principalities, duchies, bishops, and free cities, each levying taxes, each minting coins. In theory, the emperor had authority over the currency, but in practice, every local prince could, and did, issue money. That decentralized minting set the trap. Here's how it unspooled. Facing desperate military bills, rulers started debasing their coinage. They mixed cheaper metals, copper, tin, even lead, into coins that still carried the same face value. Imagine melting a single ounce of silver and stretching it into 3 coins by adding base metal. Instantly, you've tripled the money supply without producing 1 extra loaf of bread, 1 extra bale of cloth. That's inflation in its rawest form. Worse, this behavior spread. A race to the bottom ensued. Every state that fell behind in paying soldiers or suppliers secretly lowered the silver content of its coins to meet obligations. Coins that looked like silver on the outside were copper inside. At first, only merchants and money changers whispered suspicions. Soon, ordinary people could see prices climbing and confidence collapsing. They called it Kipper and Wipper, nicknames for the fraudsters and the crooked scales used to cheat honest trade. Kippers clipped small pieces off coin rims. Whippers rigged scales to swap good coins for bad. It was a primitive, brutal form of financial deception, an early inflationary spiral that arrived before central banks, before paper notes, before digital currency. As debasement accelerated, markets fragmented. Merchants refused bad coin. Cities forbade certain monies. In regions where trust evaporated, traders reverted to barter or preferred hard foreign coin from more stable economies, notably the bustling Dutch provinces. The breakdown wasn't just economic, it became political. Discontent festered, riots erupted, and authority weakened at precisely the moment cohesion was most needed. The people driving the scheme rarely saw themselves as villains. They framed it as wartime necessity. Armies had to be paid, fortresses provisioned. But each restruck coin quietly stole value from citizens without taxation appearing on any ledger. That's a crucial lesson from history. Tamper with the medium of exchange, and you corrode the social contract. The crisis didn't stop at runaway prices. It metastasized into full monetary collapse. Soldiers paid in debased money could not feed themselves. They looted the countryside. Farmers refused to sell grain for coin that would not buy next month's seed. Trade routes frayed as merchants refused to accept local currencies. Towns starved, and plague and famine followed. In some regions, the human toll of the monetary breakdown rivaled the battlefield's deaths. A corrupt currency became a weapon as lethal as cannon and plague combined. By around 1623, panic peaked. Citizens threw worthless pieces away or melted them for base metal. Authorities tried patchwork solutions, new coinages, proclamations, edicts promising revaluation. But faith in money is fragile. Once public confidence collapses, it is nearly impossible to restore quickly. The Kipper and Wipper episode functions as a 4-century-old warning about monetary trust, very much like the hyperinflations of modern times, whether Weimar in the 1920s or Zimbabwe in the 2000s. In that sense, Kipper and Wipper was the original quantitative easing, ancient rulers printing value out of thin air by altering the metallic content of coins. The mechanics changed over time, from clipped silver to printing presses to electronic ledger entries, but the underlying impulse endures. When states need cash fast, they debase their promises. Even the ending of the crisis offers a sobering parallel. Resolution arrived not through enlightened reform, but exhaustion and reinvention. Once destruction ran its course and people had lost everything, rulers patched the system, blamed rivals, minted fresh coinage, and moved on, while those who had converted wealth early into land, movable assets, or foreign species survived, often enriched. The poor, who had trusted the currency until the last bell, were left destitute. This is the bitter continuity of monetary history. Those who understand and act first can preserve value. Those who trust the system uncritically are usually the biggest losers. That pattern repeats through time. We will also look at how people tried to fight back. Town councils and guilds set up mutual credit and local barter networks to skirt worthless coin. Merchants issued bills and letters of exchange, trusting reputation over minted metal. Clergy and scholars argued that steady money was essential to justice and social order, a view casually ignored in wartime haste. Those dissenting voices matter because they showed a different path, one based on transparency and restraint rather than secret clipping. In the next episode, we unpack those alternatives and the propaganda techniques rulers used to hide their theft and how the lessons matter today. When we left off, Europe was falling apart under 1,000 clipped coins. But the Kipper and Wipper story is not simply a historical curiosity. It is a mirror showing how governance, finance, and human incentive can combine to hollow out a society. The officials running the debasement schemes were not fools. They knew the danger of admitting they were creating fake money. So they dressed it up as reform, defense spending, or emergency necessity. They had to because admitting the truth would have destroyed their authority and perhaps invited rebellion. History doesn't stop being useful when it's old. It teaches us that monetary faith is fragile, that systems built on promises require broad belief to survive, and that when leaders take shortcuts, whether by clipping coins or cutting corners with fiscal discipline, the consequences can echo for generations. Each official proclamation came with grand language: stabilization, temporary measures, necessary reform. In truth, these decrees were a cloak. Beneath the rhetoric, rulers were quietly shaving value off the coins in their subjects' pockets. To run the machine, they hired private mint masters, contractors who operated the presses, supplied the dyes, and took a cut every time the sovereign reduced the silver content. These mint masters were the shadow financiers of the age. Granted exclusive rights, they mixed cheaper metals, ran the numbers, and shared the spoils with the crown. Everyone in the chain had an incentive to keep the debasement going. For the court, it was revenue without new taxes. For the mint master, it was profit. For suppliers and generals, it was payroll. The powerful called it fiscal innovation. The rest called it theft. And when the first signs of suspicion surfaced, the state's playbook switched to distraction. Pamphlets and proclamations flooded town squares blaming outsiders, foreign clipper gangs, dishonest merchants, even mythical forces. In one district, a magistrate literally accused witches of gobbling silver. It sounds absurd now, but scapegoating worked. When the truth is complicated, people prefer a villain they can name. Today, governments blame supply chains or temporary shocks. In the 17th century, they blamed witches. The theater changes, the act remains the same. Imagine a market morning in 1622. You wake, you make for the baker's stall, and the price of bread has doubled overnight. The coins in your purse ring off key. Shopkeepers tap pieces and turn away the dull ones. Rumors spread. Good money is hoarded. It vanishes into chests, crosses borders, or is melted into plate and jewelry. The velocity of money, the rate at which cash moves from hand to hand, collapses. Contracts are broken. Apprentices are sent home. The economic engine sputters. The human consequences are brutal. Those least responsible, peasants, day laborers, small shopkeepers, suffer most. Their wages are fixed by season or custom. Prices race past. Meanwhile, the well-connected exploit the gap. Noble creditors who borrowed under older, good coin repaid with the newer, debased money. Debt shrinks by stealth. In short, inflation becomes a mechanism for redistributing wealth upward. The result is not merely hardship, it is a structural theft, an engineered transfer from powerless to powerful. This moral pattern recurs across history. From ancient coin clipping to modern money printing, the few who control issuance extract advantage. Fast forward to today, and the parallels are striking. Policies that flood markets with liquidity first lift asset prices, stocks, houses, commodities. Who holds most of those assets? The wealthy. Ordinary households face higher living costs and stagnant wages. The instruments evolved, from clipped metal to electronic entries, but the dynamic often echoes the old injustice. When debasement reached the breaking point, rulers rarely admitted failure. They outlawed certain denominations, forced citizens to accept new coinage, and proclaimed price controls. But the reforms came with hidden tolls, conversion levies, forced exchanges, hefty fees that wiped private savings. What was sold as a reset often functioned as a confiscation. Hand over your old coins to be reminted, the edict read, and watch half your estate disappear in the accounting. Communication, or the lack of it, shaped outcomes. Without presses, telegraphs, or mass media, rumor, trust, and reputation were the oxygen of commerce. Merchants passed word of honest mints by secret mark. Guilds trusted letters of exchange, backed by reputation rather than the face on a coin. Entire trade networks reorganized around the few jurisdictions still trusted for specie. Money became social, a web of relationships and signals, and when that web frayed, gold itself could not fully repair the damage. By 1623, the crisis had peaked. Farmers burned grain rather than sell it for debased coin. Markets emptied. Soldiers, unpaid or paid in trash metal, deserted or pillaged. Towns that had thrived for generations shrank. The fallout was not a single headline event. It was a slow collapse, a community by community unraveling as people adapted to survive. Switching to barter, hoarding foreign coin, routing commerce through neutral cities. The long-term effect was paradoxical. The chaos demonstrated the fragility of fragmented minting. Rulers concluded that allowing many small mints to issue currency autonomously was too dangerous. Gradually, through edict and force, central authorities reasserted control. Local presses were shut, privileges revoked, and minting consolidated under state purview. That centralization planted the seeds of the national treasury and, centuries later, what we now call central banking. But the fix came with its own shadow. Concentrating the power to create money reduced petty clipping, but it also concentrated the capacity to engineer money at scale. Mint masters were replaced by ministries and bankers. The tool changed, yet the temptation persisted. Centralization stabilized transactions, yes, but it also concentrated the means to manufacture value in the hands of a few bureaucrats and financiers. There's an uncomfortable irony here. The very reforms that prevented the wild clipping of the past created an institutional monopoly that could be used for new forms of extraction if governance and restraint failed. The Kipper and Wipper crisis thus did more than end a chapter of regional mischief. It helped birth the architecture that would govern money for centuries, an architecture capable of both protecting and abusing public trust. That is why the past matters. The Kipper and Wipper episode is not a dusty anecdote. It's a study in incentives, communication, and power, and a warning that the tools of money can be wielded either to preserve social order or to hollow it out. If modern policymakers forget that lesson, they risk repeating the moral mistakes under new technologies. The story isn't finished. In the next segment, we'll focus on resistance, how ordinary communities developed informal credit networks, merchant codes, and mutual guarantees to survive, and how rulers used propaganda to conceal the theft. Those tactics, the scapegoats, the dramatized reforms, the forced conversions, remain in play in other guises today. Understanding them is the first step toward building systems that protect trust rather than exploit it. Stay alert. It was never really about stabilizing the economy. It was about power, because once rulers discovered that controlling money meant controlling the people, the game changed forever. After the Kipper and Wipper crisis, leaders across the empire realized something unmistakable. You didn't need to seize land or raise armies to dominate a population. If you controlled the currency they relied on, their savings, wages, and ability to trade, you held influence over their entire lives. The crisis didn't just expose financial corruption, it created a new political reality. Money was no longer a neutral medium of exchange, it became a weapon of governance. And the echoes of that realization ripple through history. Every major monetary institution that came afterward, from the Bank of England in 1694 to the Federal Reserve in 1913, followed the same doctrine: centralize the power of issuance to prevent chaos. At least, that's how it was justified. But there's an irony here. Centralizing money didn't eliminate instability. It simply standardized it. Instead of many small crises happening across scattered regions, the world entered an era where a single monetary mistake could bring down entire economies. Before the crisis, people could see debasement, coins looked different, felt lighter, rang duller on the table. You could hold corruption in your hand. Today, the same erosion happens quietly. Not through furnaces and hammers, but through keystrokes and policy meetings. Inflation no longer announces itself as a clipped coin. It shows up as groceries doubling in price, rent rising faster than wages, quiet anxiety on payday. A mill worker in Saxony in 1622 felt his money shrinking every time he bought bread. A young professional in 2025 feels the same thing when their salary no longer covers the basics. The tools changed, the consequences didn't. When we look back, the Kipper and Wipper crisis is not some obscure historical footnote. It's an early blueprint for what happens when governments try to solve debt with illusionary money. It works in the short term, it destroys trust in the long term. And once trust breaks, something deeper collapses. The collective belief that society is working as it should. After 1623, many people simply stopped trusting official coins. Merchants demanded foreign currency. Farmers preferred barter. Silver bullion became more reliable than stamped money. The trauma left a psychological scar. The destruction wasn't just economic, it was cultural. This fear resurfaced centuries later during Germany's hyperinflation of the 1920s. Older generations recognized the pattern instantly. They had heard echoes of it from their grandparents. The memory of betrayal doesn't fade easily. Because money is not just metal or paper, money is memory, money is trust. And when trust is violated, recovery takes generations, not years. Yet despite the devastation, the architects of the crisis did not suffer. They were not punished, they were rewarded. Many of the mint masters who engineered the debasement walked away with fortunes. They purchased estates, titles, and influence. Their wealth survived. The public's wealth evaporated. Sound familiar? This is the recurring pattern in every monetary collapse. Whether it's 1623, 1923, or today, the powerful find ways to convert dying currency into tangible assets. The ordinary citizen holds on, hoping the system will correct itself, and loses everything. In modern terms, the coin clipping of the 1600s is mirrored by zero-interest debt, ballooning balance sheets, and trillion-dollar stimulus injections. New tools, same psychology, governments stretch beyond their means. Central authorities insist the crisis is temporary, and everyday people watch the value of their money quietly slip away. But there is one more layer to this story, and it may be the most revealing of all. Despite the suffering it caused, the crisis provided proof of something fundamental. Money has no power unless people believe in it. It doesn't matter if currency is gold, paper, or digital code. Its value lives entirely in the shared confidence that it will be accepted tomorrow. Once that belief cracks, no decree, no reform, and no authority can force it back into existence. By the late 1620s, new monetary standards were introduced. Private mints were banned in many regions. Some states pegged their currency to fixed silver weights. Eventually, the Holy Roman Emperor implemented a unified system to restore order. But the trust that had been lost lingered in memory. The term Kipper and Wipper became shorthand for deceit, mismanagement, and false promises, a warning whispered across generations. And now, 400 years later, the world faces another era where currencies are stretched thin, debts are spiraling, and confidence is fragile. We no longer clip coins, we inflate supply, we no longer dilute silver, we dilute purchasing power. The technology evolved, the incentives did not. Every empire that treats money as limitless eventually discovers that trust is not. The Kipper and Wipper crisis was more than a disaster. It was a mirror, reflecting humanity's oldest temptation, to create value out of nothing and believe there will be no cost.